Alright everybody, get prepared to both laugh and shriek in the Sci-Fi-Night Top 5. Hello and welcome to another episode of Sci-Fi-Night Top 5. So, Halloween continues and finishes up here on Sci-Fi-Night, and in this episode we're checking out our top 5 favorite horror comedies. So, in our first Halloween top 5 list, we counted down our top 5 favorite films to watch on Halloween, and in the following year we listed our top 5 favorite Simpsons Halloween specials. So, for the third run, it's only fitting that we combine the two a bit. Horror and comedy are two very distinct genres that usually don't mix, but when combined well, damn do we get some great entertainment. From old school stuff like Little Shop of Horrors and Arachnophobia, to more modern stuff like Jennifer's Body, Black Sheep, and the criminally underrated Eight-Legged Freaks, there's tons of films that successfully combine these two themes. We're gonna stay clear of spoofs and parodies though, like the Scary Movie films or Haunted House, since we want some of that classic horror comedy that started out around the 80s and 70s. So since there's so much to choose from and we really don't want to leave anything out, we're gonna need some backup from Joseph Ari, a good friend of the show, and let's face it, it really wouldn't be Halloween on this channel without him.
Thank you so much, Sebastian, for having me back on this show. And yes, can you believe it? This is our third annual Halloween special. Man, how time flies. But yes, you are absolutely right. If done right, comedy and horror creates perfect entertainment, which is why I'm so glad to share my personal list with you and to be exposed to your personal list. However, again, as always, I have a couple disclaimers first. First of all, films like Trick or Treat or Cabin in the Woods, these two I really wanted to put on my list. I simply didn't because I already put them on my top 5 favorite Halloween movies of all time. So I want this list to be unique, original, and without any of the movies that we already covered in our other specials. And also, if you do not like my list or if you do not like Sebastian's list, well, then that's no problem. Just let us know about your list. That having been said, Sebastian, happy Halloween and kick it off.
Alright buddy, well, we're glad to have you back on my channel, and let's just go ahead and kick things off with my number 5 spot, which goes to a 1987 cult favorite, Monster Squad. This is such a fun movie and one that I have a lot of fond memories of. So in this film, Dracula is alive, well, and after an ancient amulet, so he travels to the United States to get it, summons a slew of classic movie monsters like the Mummy and the Wolfman to help him, and it's up to a group of outcast kids to stop these monsters from taking over the world.
There's a monster in my closet.
Okay, monsters! Woo!
Alright, so to be honest, it does sound a little bit stupid, but like I said it's a fun movie, not that it's got the world's best plot. So while this is definitely more of a kids movie and isn't really scary for adults, it's still a damn enjoyable film regardless of age. It's kind of like a film where the lovable gang from the Goonies take on all of the Universal monsters, and really, what's not to love about that? The kid actors do a good job in this classic 80s way, and everything about the film just has so much energy and passion that it's hard not to get sucked into the film.
Come on, don't be chicken shit.
In addition to Dracula, we also get Frankenstein's monster, the Gill Man, a clear reference to the creature from the Black Lagoon, and tons of fun references and callbacks in what is basically a love letter to the monster movie subgenre. So while this film is kinda cheesy and definitely more on the comedy side, it's still got a lot of really fun moments and themes that really give it a whole lot of Halloween-y atmosphere. Had this film been a little heavier on the horror themes, then it probably would have been higher on the list. As of now, it's more of a kick-ass, nostalgic, fun horror comedy ride that admittedly delivers more laughs than scares, but that's also kind of why I love it.
Wolfman's got nards. Come on!
But yeah, that's my take on it. What do you think about it, and what's your number 5?
Oh yeah, Monster Squad. What an amazing 80s cheese classic. I love that movie. I remember growing up with it. And to be completely honest, you mentioned the fact that this movie did not incorporate too much horror. Well, it is still 100% cooler than this year's The Mummy. The original Universal monsters were 100% better represented in this film than they were in the piece of shit The Mummy film from this year. But I digress. Now let's get to my number 5. Which goes to the incredibly ingenious zombie comedy, Shaun of the Dead. I actually stumbled upon this movie pretty late. I know, even I find that weird because people kept on talking and talking about it, and you know what? It was worth it. That movie combined the elements of horror and comedy perfectly, and at the core of it, it is actually a romantic comedy. How do these two things mix? Well, generally, not that well. But if you have someone like Edgar Wright helming the film, and the incredible duo that is Nick Frost and Simon Pegg in the film, you have gold. This movie has the perfect British humor, it was the start of the unofficial Cornetto trilogy, and it surprisingly stayed true and loyal to the overall zombie genre. Yes, it has all the gore, it has all the blood, it even has the dramatic moment where a beloved character has to be killed because he has turned into a zombie. I love this movie, I have praised this movie numerous times, and every single time I watch it, I find something else in the background. It is extremely cleverly written, shot, and directed. Edgar Wright created a modern comedy masterpiece, and yeah, all credits to everyone involved in the making of this film. But now I'm really curious, tell me about your number 4.
Shaun of the Dead is a great choice that really well balances horror and comedy, but I don't want to talk too much about it as I'm going to get a little bit deeper into it later. Anyway, that brings me just to the number 4 spot on my list, which goes to the 2005 film Feast. Aw man, I hate that this film isn't more popular because it is a blast. It doesn't really have the best rating on IMDb or anything, but this is a real film for the fans of the monster horror genre, and they dip their toes in the comedy pool for just the right amount of time. So in this film, a group of colorful characters have to barricade themselves inside a bar to protect themselves from bloodthirsty monsters outside. Yeah, that's the entire plot. It's not really a very story-driven film per se. Yeah, so that is almost literally the entire plot. We get introduced to a few characters who all of a sudden come under attack by vicious, deadly monsters and turn this sleazy bar into a sleazy bloodbath.
A storm of hell is coming down on this place any second. I don't know what they are. I don't know where they came from. All I do know is that these fuckers are fast, nasty, and hungry.
The people barricade themselves inside the bar, and we get introduced to these classic horror movie stereotypes, complete with information and an estimate of how long they'll live, which is super self-aware and works to the film's advantage.
Just bring me over and grab that money.
The movie really kicks into violent, bloody high gear once the attack commences and continues until the brutal end in a real roller coaster ride of a film. And as you both laugh and scream on a roller coaster, it really is the perfect analogy of this film, which has just as many laughs as liters of blood being spilled. Everything in this film is over the top and crazy, which really works for this kind of film. It exploits all the cliches and tropes of monster horror, making fun of them, but in a loving kind of way. Both the horror and comedy is bonkers and crazy, and this really is a film that barely lets you breathe before throwing something freaky at you. The monster design isn't really the most original, but it works fine. The actors all do a suitable job, and the effects are actually pretty good. It's a shame this film doesn't get more attention because this has buckets of blood, laughs, and is an overall good time to be had by all, except those getting their faces eaten off by these fucked up monsters. Alright, but now I want to know, are you one of a few people who has seen it? If so, what do you think about it, and what's your number 4?
To my everlasting shame, I have to admit that I have never seen Feast. However, since you mentioned it, I will order it on Blu-ray and I will review it on this channel. I promise you that. Which brings me to my number 4, which goes to Idle Hands.
So I came all the way over here, you said you was holding. I didn't say what I was holding.
And similar to your number 4, not too many people have ever seen Idle Hands, which is a bummer because to me it is a 90s classic. The movie tells a story about Anton. He's a slob who spends his days playing video games, getting high and watching television. That's all he ever does.
Think you should have like a goal? My dream life would be to lie around all day in bed and watch TV while some hot broad delivers me food.
However, when a killing spree occurs in his hometown, he soon realizes that he is responsible because turns out his hand is possessed by the devil and starts to go on a killing spree. And now we have the perfect combination of gore, horror, and comedy crammed into this 90s cheese fest. And if you are a sucker for 90s cheese, you will love it. I love the supporting cast. I mean, Seth Green plays one of his best buddies because in the film, he kills his 2 best friends, but they come back as zombies. Why? Well, see for yourself.
There was this big bright white light at the end of a long tunnel. So what happened? We were like, forget that, man. Too far.
That in itself is hilarious. It also features one of the first performances by Jessica Alba, and even back then, she was hot as hell. The movie is funny, it's gory, it's clever, and it actually takes place around Halloween. It's a perfect movie to pop in during a Halloween party. If you have not seen it, you are missing out. Go check it out, you will love it. But now, please tell me about your number 3.
Alright, so despite me seeing quite a few horror films, I actually have to admit that I haven't seen Idle Hands, but judging by its placement on your list and what you've said about it, it sounds like that needs to change. Anyway, that brings us to my number 3 spot, which goes to 1985's Fright Night. Alright, so if you're a horror fan and you haven't seen this, then you're doing yourself a disservice. I'm just gonna get that right out of the way. So in what is once more an overlooked cult favorite, we follow young horror-obsessed Charlie who's always watching his favorite show Fright Night, presented by horror host Peter Vincent. And yes, that is a reference to a legendary Vincent Price, by the way.
Stop, you creature of the night.
One day, Charlie gets a new neighbor, Jerry, who he's suspicious of and ends up spying on. By the looks of things, Jerry is actually a vampire wanted for several gruesome murders and may very well have his sights set on Charlie and his family as well.
Charlie! Charlie, can you hear me?
So who's gonna believe a horror-obsessed teenager claiming that his neighbor is actually a vampire? Well, the answer is nobody, which means it's up to Charlie and horror cliches to fight off his neighbor. Realizing nobody's gonna help him, Charlie actually seeks out his hero, Peter Vincent, who is of course just a TV host and not a real vampire killer. But he's forced to live up to his image and take on this evil force. So yeah, that might sound a little bit silly, and well, it kind of is, but it isn't exactly the right way. Fright Night balances humor and suspense in a great and very loving way, creating something pretty unique while simultaneously paying homage to a lot of the classics. On top of that, this film has some great practical effects and awesome monster moments that fans of the genre will love. Walking the line expertly, Fright Night manages to scare its way to a well-earned 3rd spot. But with my number 3 out of the way, that leaves us with yours.
Yup, Fright Night is a true classic among classics, and personally, I even like the remake starring Colin Farrell. Don't hate me for it, I just think it's a well done remake. This is one of the films that laid the groundwork for horror comedies because it really incorporated both. It stayed loyal to the vampire mythology. They can't come into your house uninvited. You kill them with wooden stakes. All that kind of stuff that we kind of forgotten throughout the past couple years. Twilight. But me being a sucker for vampire movies, and I mean real vampire movies, how can I say no? Great choice. Which brings me to my number 3.
You do? You have?
They're here.
Ghostbusters. No, not that piece of shit. The real Ghostbusters. There's only one Ghostbusters, not that monstrosity that we were exposed to last year.
It's gonna leave a mark.
The power of panic compels you!
All jokes aside, the original Ghostbusters is a classic among classics. People still praise this movie to no end, and I believe for very good reasons, because it's not a silly comedy. If you look at the way it's shot, if you look at some of the creatures in the film, it is genuinely scary. The humor is derived from the amazing characters, the dialogue, and their amazing chemistry. And Bill Murray, once again, Venkman is one of the coolest anti-heroes ever, because the Ghostbusters, it's so hilarious that these four losers were the heroes of an entire generation, because they were relatable. I love the scares, I love the laughs, and I can pop this movie in, day out. It's a perfect horror comedy for Halloween, and I'm gonna assume that all of you have already seen Ghostbusters. If you didn't and you only saw the new version, well, do yourself the favor and check out the real Ghostbusters, because that movie is incredible.
We came, we saw, we kicked its ass.
And now tell me about your number 2.
Oh man, you know, I kind of feel like an asshole for not mentioning Ghostbusters at least once, but to be fair, I always saw it as more kind of towards the comedy side as opposed to horror, even though it does have some parts in it that creeped me out as a kid. Anyway, Ghostbusters is obviously an awesome movie that deserves a high spot on any good movie list ever, pretty much. But that leaves us with my number 2 spot, which goes to 2004's Shaun of the Dead. This excellent film, penned by writer-director Edgar Wright, has become kind of a modern classic of horror comedy, and rightfully so. It's got so much rewatch value, charm, and overall respect and love for the horror genre, as well as a slew of great horror references that you'll probably miss the first time around. Alright, so just to be clear, I actually do really love Zombieland, but I kind of felt like I had to choose that or Shaun of the Dead for my number 2 spot, and in the end, Shaun of the Dead is just a little bit better for me. So in this British film, we follow Sean, a middle-aged man stuck at a dead-end job without any productive friends or future prospects. This obviously is not a big turn-on for his girlfriend, who breaks up with him, giving him a cold reality check. So that kind of sounds like a romantic comedy where our hero has to win back a girl, and I guess technically it kind of is, it just happens to take place during the zombie apocalypse. So this film kind of coined the term rom-com zom, basically a romantic comedy with zombies in it. And really at its core, this is a film where the characters are the focus and the zombies are used as a plot device, just as with George Romero's classic zombie trilogy that used the zombie setting to talk about societal issues. What's great too is how you slowly start to see the signs of a zombie breakout.
Religious groups are calling it Judgment Day. There's panic on the streets of London.
As an increasing number of reports of
Serious attacks on
people who are literally being eaten alive.
How much setup and payoff there is, all the references, and basically the comedy is really well handled.
Locked and barricaded. Police is
Oh, for God's sake! Oh, he's got armor! Get him!
And the film doesn't shy away from some bloody violence or heartbreaking drama. Basically, all the necessary elements of a great horror comedy are to be found here, with characters you truly care about, making both elements even stronger. At the end of the day, I see this as always being one of the best horror comedies ever. And well, yeah, I guess we already heard what you thought about it, so let's jump right to your number 2.
I'm so glad, once again, we do have one film in common. And now I get to talk about my number 2, which goes to Gremlins 2, The New Batch.
We told you the rules.
Oh, the rules.
Remember the first one?
Just mentioning that film alone puts a smile on my face, because when I was a kid, I used to watch this film over and over and over and over again. Because despite it being a sequel to the original Christmas horror film, this movie is kind of the Looney Tune version of the Gremlins. It is self-referential, there are tons of meta jokes in it, and it literally did not care about the rules that were established in the original. That may sound like I'm complaining, but I don't. This movie is incredible. I still don't know what happened behind the scenes of this film, because it is so unique, it is so clever. It poked fun at the concept of sequels. by creating something original. It still incorporates some creepy and eerie ass moments, like the spider gremlin, for example, always creeped the living fuck out of me. I also love the fact that this time around, not all gremlins look alike. We have a couple standouts. Gizmo has never been cuter, and the fact that he is acting like Rambo in this one always made me chuckle. Hulk Hogan has a great cameo, and by the way, there are countless Easter eggs and cameos. I can't even list them all, and I don't even want to, because if you have not seen Gremlins 2, you are missing out. This movie is a love letter to movies in general. It addresses the fact that most sequels are cash grabs. And it has John Glover, whom you may know from Smallville, giving one of his greatest, most hilarious performances. I've always loved this movie, I always will, and if you have not seen it, go check it out. But now we have reached the finale. Tell me about your number one.
Oh man, Gremlins 2 is such a fun and underrated movie with a lot of creativity. I really like how meta it is, and some of the really weird gremlins were super cool, like the spider gremlin or the electricity gremlin. And of course, Gizmo is just as cute every time around. So that brings us to my number one spot, which goes to 1987's Evil Dead 2. Oh hell yeah! The sequel to the independent horror hit Evil Dead is by many seen as one of the best horror sequels ever made, and I can't really argue with that. Yeah, it's a bit cliche, but I gotta be true to myself, and this will always be the number one spot for me. For those unfortunate enough not to have seen this, it's not really a sequel, more of an alternate version of Evil Dead 1. We still follow our main hero Ash, played by fan favorite Bruce Campbell, as he and his girlfriend drive to a secluded cabin out in the woods for a nice quiet weekend with no demons involved. Well, guess what? They stumble upon the Book of the Dead and unwittingly release a torrent of evil on this quiet mountain cabin, as Ash has to once again become our unlikely hero and fight off his ancient evil. And what we get is a rare case of a film that many people think is better than the first. So even if you haven't seen the Evil Dead movies, I think you probably know that there's a whole bunch of Evil Dead involved, meaning that demons and monsters descend upon our heroes in a bunch of crazy, bloody, violent ways. And while this is pretty similar to the first Evil Dead, what makes it stand out is how much extra dark humor is involved in the sequel. So what makes this film so great is how well balanced the horror and comedy elements are. More than just setting a comedy in a spooky setting, this features some pretty horrific stuff alongside some great laughs and iconic scenes. This is important because I feel like a lot of horror comedies tend to lose the horror aspect or go a little bit too much on one or the other. This is a film that gave us the classic chainsaw hand and turned Ash into that classic anti-hero we all know and love. Overall, this is a classic horror comedy that truly lives up to the subgenre and has gone on to inspire many other films that take after the excellence that was produced here. And that's my list. So, Joseph-Ari, what do you think of Evil Dead 2 and what's your number one?
Of course, I love Evil Dead Part 2. The only reason I did not put it on my list is basically the fact that it is very similar to Gremlins 2. It is a sequel, but also a parody. It took everything that was sincere about the first one and poked fun at it. And this is why I didn't want to have the same concept twice on my list. That having been said, Evil Dead 2 is a Sam Raimi masterpiece. It is the Bruce Campbell one-man show. In my opinion, it is still the best out of all the Evil Dead films. It is hilarious, it is creepy as fuck, it is so super gory, but at the same time, it is just hilarious, it's a blast. It's one of those films that you just have to watch with a bunch of people to completely appreciate the zaniness of it all. Which leads me to my number one. Zombieland. I know, most people prefer Shaun of the Dead over Zombieland. To me, Zombieland is the superior film, because it is so many things. First of all, it's a feel-good movie.
I haven't cried like that since Titanic.
It actually has some heartwarming character moments between these incredible great actors. The main cast, every single one, Woody Harrelson, Jesse Eisenberg, Abigail Breslin, and Emma Stone, they were all incredible. I think this was the second time I was ever exposed to Emma Stone after Superbad. I fell in love with her during that film. But also Abigail Breslin, who in this film was only a little girl, was incredibly hilarious and incredibly badass. Jesse Eisenberg got stuck with the role of the phobic nerd, which he sadly brought to his portrayal of Lex Luthor. However, in this movie it fit perfectly. I like the fact that this movie explores who would really survive during the zombie apocalypse. A phobic loser because he pretty much avoids everyone, two con artists basically because they fuck over everyone, and of course the ultimate badass. Which leads me to Woody Harrelson. And yes, this is one of my all-time favorite performances given by Woody Harrelson. He is incredible in this movie. He's a complete badass, but he also gets the best lines of dialogue in the film. He is so hilarious. I love the fact that this movie incorporated certain survival rules that constantly pop up to remind you what to do during the zombie apocalypse. And this movie has the greatest cameo of all time with the one and only Bill Murray.
God damn it, Bill fucking Murray!
Which leads me back to an earlier movie on my list, Ghostbusters, because this movie also happens to be a love letter to the original Ghostbusters. And if you look at it, it is pretty much Ghostbusters with zombies. It's a feel-good movie. It's a character-driven piece. However, once the violence and the gore goes down, oh, it is going down. The final shootout at Pacific Playland is just phenomenal. Everything about this movie hit the right note. I'm still waiting for a sequel. I will probably never get a sequel, but screw it. Zombieland is incredible. Zombieland has always been one of my all-time favorites, and I will defend this movie to no end. Thank you, buddy, for having me back on the show once again. I love our annual tradition. I hope we will never stop doing Halloween shows together because it is our favorite holiday of all time. It was truly a blast. Have a happy Halloween, all you Sci-Fi-Night viewers out there. Also a happy Halloween to all of my viewers. Sebastian, my buddy, have a good one. Celebrate, be crazy, be out there, and be creepy as shit, because you have to. It's Halloween. And for all my subscribers, if you have not subscribed to Sebastian yet, do so. Sci-Fi-Night is one of the most underrated channels ever. If you're into underrated sci-fi or horror, you have to check out this incredible channel. Very often I stumble upon gems that I'm like, how did I didn't know about that? For example, this time around, he exposed me to Feast and I have to watch it. So make sure to subscribe to his channel. And thank you guys, as always, for watching. And if you like what you see here and you want to see more, then just subscribe.
Well, like I said, Zombieland is a really fun, enjoyable film with high rewatch value and tons of crazy moments that you won't forget. At the end of the day, I kind of prefer Shaun of the Dead for some of the subtlety and a lot of kind of British humor involved there, but they're both a good watch either way. So that about does it for this Sci-Fi-Night Top 5. Once again, and as always, we want to thank our good friend Joseph Aria. If you're not already subscribed to him, you're doing yourself a disservice. Do it, some of the best stuff around on YouTube. Anyway, that wraps up Halloween. Have a good holiday, everybody, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the horror-thon.